You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your scurrying host, Abraham.
And I'm your master splinter host, Shane.
Ooh, that's a good one. We're a psychology podcast. We talk about all the cool things that people do, and sometimes we talk about the cool things that animals do, and that's kind of what we're talking about today.
I mean, isn't it always that the things that animals do are way cooler than the things that humans do most of the time? I mean, like, think about this. Our last episode was Scientology. Very not cool. This is way cooler.
Fair. Indeed. Yeah, so anyway, as I said, we talk about the psychology thing. If you're joining us for the first time, then welcome. I think this is going to be a really cool one. This is, I think, more par for the course with the kind of topics that we tend to do. And it's fairly quick, so we'll get into sort of our big intro and we'll unpack it and all of that, but I don't think this is going to be one of our longer ones, although as we always say, we drag things out, ad nauseum, so we'll see.
It's a skill set.
It is a skill set. And Shane, do you know what day that this episode comes out?
Wednesday.
It does come out Wednesday. Thank you. That was really good. Comedy chops. Excellent.
It's late at night. I'm tired. I'm delirious. It's great.
It comes out 1 week after our last episode and 1 week before our next episode, in fact.
Wild. So predictable.
This comes out on May 24th, and May 24th has a few holidays that we'll recognize. Not as many as some other days, but it's got some holidays to talk about.
Yeah, so today is Brother's Day, so I get to celebrate my little brother.
And I will as well.
You're going to celebrate my little brother too? That's great.
Yeah, he's the best. I wish he was my little brother.
Aww.
It is also Tiara Day, for those of you wearing tiaras, however you like to say it.
And if you have your tiara and it's not adjusted, please take some time to adjust it because you deserve that, queen.
Indeed.
Also, it's Scavenger Hunt Day, which is so much fun.
Yeah, love scavenger hunts. It is Aviation Maintenance Technician Day, so appreciate those people who help keep the planes in the sky and not falling to the ground.
Interesting. My brother-in-law's a helicopter mechanic, so that's perfect.
Oh,
good job, Justin. It's also International Heritage Breeds Day.
Breeds Week.
I'm sorry, week even. So we get 7 of them.
That's right. 7 consecutive celebration. I had to look into this one because I was a little curious what that meant. And it has to do with how, as we've practiced agriculture, we've sort of bred animals into this weird chimera of not what they used to be. Uh-huh. And so the heritage breeds celebrates and promotes the idea and practice of maintaining some of those species as they were before we started turning them into machines
Pugs.
for human consumption. Yes.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, before they got all weird.
Very good. All right, now, as a quick thing, people who listen to us, thank you so much for being here. People who are joining us for the first time, either way, wherever you fall, if you would like to support us, you can do that several ways. You can join us on Patreon. You can pick up some merch at our store. You can like and subscribe. You can leave a rating and review. You can tell a friend about us. You can adopt 2 rats, name one of them Why We Do and the other one What We Do. And if you do that, please post about it and tag us in those.
Yeah.
And I'll talk more about how you can support us at the end of this topic. And if you would like to reach out to us directly, you can email us at info@wwd.podcast.com. Let's get into our topic.
Yes, let's talk about this. Rats are rad as hell.
Indeed. All right. Now, let's set the stage. We're going to tell this story format style. So, picture this. It is 2016. There's a reporter for The Guardian. It is journalist Emma Young, and she describes an encounter she had in a lab in Tanzania.
Yes, in her report, she describes a compact, sweltering room within a compound nestled in the verdant southern highlands of Tanzania.
Ooh.
By the way, Tanzania, best coffee I've ever had was from Tanzania.
I'll have to try that. Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, my God. It came from a very specific farm. It was like a very specific batch, but it was delicious when I had it.
Nice.
Now, in an intriguing scene that unfolded on a mid-December day, 3 technicians, adorned in white lab coats, observed an intricate glass and metal chamber and a sizable brown pouch rat named Charles. What a great name.
Right? So with care, Charles was lowered into the chamber, his snout poised toward a sequence of 10 sliding metal plates positioned at the base of the chamber. So a technician unlatched the first plate, unveiling a small hole, and Charles nasally explored this hole. His acute olfactory senses at work, but he decided to move on. He did not spend any time at this hole. The hole was promptly sealed with a resonant click, and a subsequent plate was slit open, so the next hole in the sequence. This time, Charles was interested. He sniffed intently, diligently scraping his paws against the metal surface. His 5 claws spread resolutely, and a technician observing this calls out, 2!
Oh yeah, that's what you do when a rat scratches a hole. So all right, now, near the window, Charles' colleague had a secretive chart covertly obscuring its contents to avoid contaminating their data collection. The tech discreetly marked a tick. Emma, curiosity piqued, glanced over to glimpse the chart, a grid of small boxes arranged in 10 columns and 10 rows, each adorned with a distinct code. Within every line, 2 boxes were shaded gray, and now a tick mark had been placed within a white square. Charles, the indomitable rat, had potentially saved someone's life.
So Charles, as we described kind of already, is an African giant pouched rat. And he belongs to a unique species endemic to the vast expanse of sub-Saharan Africa. And he's among a unique clique of especially trained rodents, one of 30 of his kind, residing and toiling diligently in Morogoro, which I think is the name of this sort of municipality, if you will, situated a few hundred kilometers west of Tanzania's bustling metropolis, Dar es Salaam. I really hope I did not butcher that. I'm sorry. And so we're talking about these rats here. These extraordinary rats partake in this groundbreaking endeavor, which is to detect the presence of tuberculosis. And we're going to describe more about tuberculosis, but briefly, it is a malevolent ailment that ravages the lungs and jeopardizes countless lives around the world.
Yeah, it is also often referred to as the consumption.
Fact, yes.
Yes. So Charles was actually in a test, and the positive samples that he was smelling had already been tested for tuberculosis or TB with random additional samples in the mix. And he and his training to detect TB was being compared against lab data. And further, any positive samples would be then sent to the lab to look at for a TB diagnosis.
Yep.
Kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, I'm curious, and we've talking about these rats, and I'm curious how our listeners, how did you feel about rats before hearing the story? And I'm going to be really curious to hear how you feel about rats after the story. So be prepared to fall in love with them now. John Oliver already kind of is. He's pretty into erotic rat art, which he shows on his show. But yeah, so we're going to tell you all about these rats. I do want to say, because we've described them as these African giant pouched rats, they are large for rats, but they're not actually like huge. They're not cat size or anything like that. They're just kind of, they're large. They're on the large side for a rat, but they're adorable.
Yeah, they're giant for rats, but not giant for other animals that are actual giants.
Yeah, not nearly as large as like an elephant or a blue whale.
That'd be a horrifying sized rat. Now, let's talk for a second, because I think it's important to understand what these rats are doing this test, but they're doing it in relation to what you described as a horrific disease called tuberculosis. Now, what tuberculosis is, or we're going to shorten it for TB as we go forward, it's an infectious disease that causes lots of deaths worldwide. And even though there are vaccines and drugs available and have been for a long time, TB still kills more people than any other infectious disease.
Isn't that wild?
That's crazy. Like, I had no idea.
Yeah, it is actually a surprising, it's kind of one of these sneaky diseases you don't think about, but it's sort of out there doing incredible damage all the time. And according to the World Health Organization, or WHO, exactly, there were about 10 million new cases of TB in a recent year, with 1.2 million deaths among people without HIV and an additional 251,000 deaths of tuberculosis patients among people who also had HIV.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's rough, man.
That's a huge number of people. Now, the main germ that causes TB is Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It usually infects the lungs. However, it can also spread to other parts of the body, like the lymph nodes, the kidneys, abdomen, skin, bones, joints, and brain covering. So I know we're talking about rats. Bet you didn't expect that we were talking about diseases in this episode.
Not nearly this much. Now, after being exposed to the germ, the tuberculosis bacteria, most people don't get sick right away, but they can have this dormant infection called latent TB. A small percentage of people with latent TB, which is about 5 to 15%, will develop actual active TB disease. People who are infected with both TB and HIV are at a much higher risk of getting sick with the actual TB disease.
Now, in the United States, it's recommended to screen all HIV-infected patients for latent TB, just in case, and people with weakened immune systems or those receiving certain types of treatment are also more likely to develop active TB compared to the general population. So you can imagine like somebody who's on like an immunosuppressive type of medication or treatment, like somebody who's maybe experiencing like cancer treatment, HIV infected people makes sense. Like all of these folks that have suppressed immune systems are at risk here.
Sure. Yeah, good point. Okay, so every year, as we said, there is a huge amount of spreading of this. So if you were to chunk it into a year, there's approximately 9 million cases of new TB diagnosed around the world, with a quarter of them in the entire world occurring in Africa. Sadly, Africa also has the highest death rate, not like number, but rate, from tuberculosis compared to other regions. So not only do they have it spreading the most, but the people who actually then die from it is the highest proportion of them occur even inside that population.
It's so unfortunate. Now, TB can be prevented with a vaccine or treated with antibiotics, but if it's left untreated, it can be fatal. And unfortunately, many patients with TB are never diagnosed, which contributes to the spread of this disease. So it's kind of like I would say it's like early COVID, where like people, you couldn't get diagnosed because nobody knew what it was, and it spread so rapidly, but TB is far more deadly.
Right. And part of the reason for this is that the current microscope-based test, which has been in use for a long time. Like this has been the way of identifying tuberculosis samples for 125 years in Tanzania and other financially limited countries. It's not that great at detecting TB. It only detects about 60% of the cases, which means that a good 40% of those cases are showing up as not being positive for TB, even though those might then go on to cause illness and death and spread to other people. And furthermore, by using this detection method, the microscope-based detection, the success rate drops even lower, around 20% for people who are also infected with HIV. So if you look at countries where you have high rates of HIV and high rates of TB, and then it becomes even more difficult to detect TB in people who have HIV, you can imagine that the detection system is like, you're operating at like guesswork levels at that point.
Right. That's wild. I mean, it's not efficient at all.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate system. It's really a bummer that it's like that impactful and that difficult to even like get a handle on it, because we can't figure out how prevalent it is just by using the tools at sort of normal disposal.
Right. Absolutely. So I feel like we get fewer ads when we criticize them. So here are some amazing, incredible products that you should definitely buy.
Okay, so we've largely been talking about tuberculosis, but we started this story talking about Charles the rat. So let's get back to Charles. Remember we put him in this box, or they put him in the box. This is from the journalist's perspective, so she reported this. And he was smelling samples. So in this box, he smelled 100 samples in that test and identified every sample that had already been positively ID'd for tuberculosis. Further, he identified 12 more that would go on for secondary testing. As we said, their testing is not great, to try and confirm if there is, in fact, tuberculosis there. And Emma went on to describe how another larger rat was added to the chamber later after Charles' work was done. He gets to go take a break, get a smoke, that sort of thing. And this new rat is added to the chamber to lend his nose to the same smelling test as Charles. So they're getting some confirmation on there. And the new rat, whose name is Vladik, was even faster than Charles. In just 15 minutes, Vladik's test confirmed almost all of Charles' correct detections and confirmed 8 of the 10 known cases out of there, so 80% success there, and indicated an additional 15 for subsequent testing.
Wow, that's wild. Now, these rats do in 20 minutes what it would take 4 days to accomplish using lab testing. So think about that for a second. It takes 4 days to accomplish this testing when a rat can do it in 20 minutes. And I think it's important when we talk about this, because these are incredible animals with incredible olfactory senses who are like, people are afraid of these things because they are incredibly efficient and incredibly fast and just like really good at what they do. Rats are very good at what they do in general.
Yeah.
So you give them a task like this, they're going to be good at it.
Yeah, and actually, like that's a great segue, because that's really what we should talk about now, because we talked about recently in an episode about dogs being trained to detect oncoming seizures in our March 15th, 2023 episode, Seizure Alert Dogs. And that was amazing, like amazing that they can do that.
That was also a Wednesday.
It was a Wednesday. Good memory. And so dogs are primarily used for these various medical smell tests, but rats are another good option. Now, we've also mentioned briefly, and I think we should return to this at some point, but bees are also being used to detect cancer, and then rats are being used to sniff out diseases and, as we'll talk about later, landmines and other things. So these rats kind of have some cool properties. Let's go ahead and talk about that.
These particular rats, these giant African pouch rats, do not have the evolutionary history of cooperation with humans that dogs do. However, they are still trainable because, they are living organisms. And also, although dogs, specifically the bloodhound, have been shown to have the strongest sense of smell, the African pouch rats are very competitive because they've proved that more accurate in those situations, finding things like buried landmines than dogs ever have. So these rats are incredibly powerful when it comes to like this detection sense that they have.
Yes, and this organization has really invested heavily in the use of rats for these type of endeavors. The organization's called APOPO or APOPO. I'm going to guess APOPO. It stands for words that I'm not sure I should try and pronounce for fear of the butchering I will do and the shame it will bring on me and the embarrassment potentially to the company. But the translation of APOPO's actual name translates to Anti-Personnel Landmines Detection Product Development is what they do. And this is a company that has invested the use of these rats for landmine detection primarily, but has expanded it. They've turned to using the rats to also help detect tuberculosis.
I mean, it's pretty incredible they were able to do that. Now, you would think that, and this is an important piece, you're talking about rats that detect diseases and explosives, right? Two very different things.
Both things that kill people.
But also very different things. Like I could have a bad cough or I could explode. And so when you start thinking about this, you kind of go, well, how does this happen? And surprisingly, the training is very similar. Like it's not very different at all. So let's kind of break this up a little bit. So as far as training goes, the first kind of element that we look at is this idea of positive reinforcement. For those listening to the show, you're probably familiar, but if you're not, then basically what it is there's essentially some type of reward that occurs right after a response or a behavior. And this procedure allows the organism to discriminate what is tuberculosis and what is not, what is a landmine and what is not. And they simply train based on that and reward based on that. So said another way, this is a simple do a thing when you smell this disease and you'll get a reward. And that's the contract that they set up with the rat. That's all it is. You do this, you get a reward when you smell this thing. When you don't smell this thing, if you do this, there's no reward, so on and so forth.
Yes. And the rats must be able to do a few things in this training. I mean, that's the gist of the training, as you just summarized it. But that means that they need to learn to do a few things. First, they must learn that they need to do something special when they smell a thing. In this case, a tuberculosis-infected sample. The second is they need to do something else if they smell anything other than the target, the infected sample. The third thing is they learn the something special that they need to do so that we can tell when they have detected something. Just saying this another way is those like, you're going to notice something different in your environment. When you do that, you need to do this one specific action and don't do it at the times that you don't smell it and only do it at the times when you do.
Makes sense. So to train the rats, the researchers would first get the rats to respond to an auditory cue that they earned a food reward for. So like when they would hear this auditory cue, which was usually a click, the person would make the click sound and immediately give the rat a small mouthful of banana mash. Apparently rats love banana mash.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen rats eat like slices of pizza, so banana mash is much healthier. And they feed them with large plastic syringes, so they don't mama bird it, so don't worry. They don't do anything like that. Like, could you imagine that researcher that does that, though? It's like, oh, good job, and then does that. So they do that, and it's click sound. It's clicker training, essentially.
Yeah, and I made the click with my mouth, but it's just like a little metal thing that looks like a can top. You just... It sort of makes a click sound like that.
It sounds like the dice bubble from Trouble.
It does. Yeah, the dice bubble from Trouble is basically the click sound that they use to try. They just get out the board game and they set it up, and every time the rat goes, just
click. Yep, it's a click and a rattle, and then they send somebody home.
Yep, and the rat runs over to take a nibble out of a syringe that's filled with yellow mush.
Love it.
So once the rat is reliably running for food when they hear the click, then the researchers then can train the rats to perform an action that will then result in the click plus food. So basically, they kind of will start to wait till the rat is moving toward or starting to do the thing they want in any approximation of what that should look like. And as soon as they do, click. And then they get more and more precise about it. So they'll stop accepting variations of that action and only more precise versions of it that are exactly what it should look like. In some arrangements of this tuberculosis situation, the rats must start clawing at a target. So basically, they smell a thing, they claw at something else to indicate, I smell the thing you want me to smell. In other arrangements, the rats are trained to simply pause. So they will either smell a target and move on, or they'll smell a target and then they'll hang there for a moment until the researcher basically clicks, responds, and then they get to move on.
Right. And so then the researchers gather samples of TB infected and non-infected spit and put it in an array so that all the samples look the same, and they're in containers that look the same, kind of essentially like that. And they teach the rats to perform whichever action they chose only when they smell infected samples through repeated trials, providing food only when the rat does the action that we talked about in response to the infected sample, and at no other time. So the rat is clawing, only claws in the presence of the TB slide or the TB sample and not anywhere else. And in this way, the rat will learn both that reacting to the sample will earn a reward, but also that they only get the reward if they react to a specific type of sample.
Yeah.
So they can do the same thing across every sample, but they're not going to get it unless they respond to specific examples at specific times.
Yes. This means that the rat is actually learning to react to the smell of the sample, but no other features of it, right? Because let's say that the spit had some amount of food in it, or something that the person had drank, or something that was unique to their DNA and biology. The rat's got to be able to filter all that out. And it's only going to say, this is the smell that I need to pay attention to. The other ones aren't important for me getting my banana mash right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Makes perfect sense.
And so once trained, then the rats can identify dozens of these samples in minutes. They just cruise through them super quick, able to just say, like, smell, yes, smell, no, smell, no, smell, yes, smell, no. And like a binary ones and zeros machine, they just crank out tons of samples super fast, really efficient.
Wild. I mean, so in these training samples that we're talking about, the rats have been 85 to 100% accurate as compared to lab tests. So keep this in mind. We talked earlier that lab tests are anywhere between 20 and at the highest 60%. So already a rat it's more accurate than a microscope test, and they're almost perfect.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
They can be.
They can be. And so, like, further, they detected samples that the lab missed and later confirmed as infected. So even better, they're like, no, you messed up. I'm a rat. You're a human, you dumb human. Here's how I'm going to fix this for you.
As you may have sort of picked up, this means obviously that tuberculosis itself has some specific smell. And I didn't bother looking up the compounds. Maybe some of you out there are like big on olfactory compounds and you'd be like, I know what that is. And great, write in, let us know. But what's important to know about this is that tuberculosis actually, like, it does have apparently a pungent enough odor that if the infection is powerfully concentrated enough, even humans can detect it. And apparently even the word tuberculosis, at least part of that word or some version of that word in other languages, has to do with the smell that, like, doctors who are specially trained can start to pick up on, and people who are like severely infected with that disease. And rats already have such a powerful nose that they're going to detect things that are way below a human's threshold to detect. And so this is a kind of easy task for them. They're like, this is basically like you to go around pointing to thing and say, car, not car. And like humans can do that very easily.
Right.
Obviously, rats could learn to do that too, but they're just doing it with their nose because we can't see as easily in the samples what's different. But the smell apparently is very easy for them to pick up on.
Interesting. Okay. That's good to know.
Right.
I don't want to smell it, but that's great that they can.
Yeah, I also think that I'm going to keep my distance as far as I can.
Absolutely.
I will say really quick, as before we transition on to the next thing, in grad school, I was required to get like annual TB tests. And I remember thinking, like, does anybody have tuberculosis? Like, why are we doing this? Is this disease that common? I had no idea it was as common as it is.
That's wild. You know, I've not had to do a TB test here in Florida, but I know, like, in some states like California, it's required to provide health services.
Yeah, Florida loves disease. They're like,
no, big fans.
It while it's hot.
Yeah, they put one in office. He's a governor. But
that was good. Now, that's essentially sort of the gist of the cool stuff about rats and tuberculosis and how rats detect tuberculosis. I mean, obviously not cool stuff about tuberculosis. That disease sucks. But there's actually even more cool stuff to talk about. Now, before we talk about those, I've kind of wondered, do we get paid more if we don't let you know that ads are coming? Let's find out. Oh, shoot.
So, rats detecting diseases, one example of rats being heroes, but there are lots and lots of examples of rats being these really cool creatures. And as we mentioned earlier, there are lots of rats that can detect landmines. In many parts of the world that have suffered wars over the last century, and it's continuous war and civil war and all that stuff, many armies seeded marching planes with mines so that enemy troops traveling the area would explode upon contact with those mines. They're very dangerous and often forgotten.
Yeah.
The mines are sensitive to a relatively small amount of weight on the trigger. And again, they are in places now that are densely populated and completely forgotten out of wartime. And so as a result, these areas can become incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, and exactly that, because most armies really have not felt obligated to retrieve the mines once the war ends. So fields may have these active landmines laying dormant for decades. And these can often be out in areas that are remote, but as you said, the urban sprawl can creep into these areas, and we're talking civilians, children, hikers, sort of everyday people. Soldiers can be in there too, and then just animals straying through peaceful meadows or wherever that find their lives suddenly cut short or their limbs spontaneously amputated when they encounter a random mine left recklessly decades earlier.
Which is another point for why rats are cooler than humans. But obviously, the cleanup is expensive, it's time-consuming, and extremely dangerous, and quite difficult because there's no way to pinpoint exactly where every single landmine was ever buried ever without getting blown up.
Or like dangerously close to being blown up, yeah.
Right. I mean, unless landmines now have GPSs on them, but I don't think that they would do that for, like, military strategy. But rats are far too small to detonate any of these mines.
Yeah.
There's not enough weight in these rats to land on a mine and then goodbye. Their superlative power of smell allows them to detect buried mines with remarkable accuracy. So, not only do they detect disease, they can find these stray landmines.
I would highly recommend that you look up some videos on this because it is adorable. You can watch these videos online. Once trained, the experimenters will take rats out into these fields that are believed to be contaminated with mines, and they'll basically let the rats go on a little leash. I mean, you can imagine they could just like let them go, but for the purposes of trying to like actually find the mines and the rat not get distracted and run off, they're on these little leashes, which is very cute, and they're on like a little harness, and the rats just scurry around looking for mines out in these fields.
Yeah. And so once they're detected, the mouse or the rat does its little jig, and then it runs back to the researcher for a banana snack, which I love. Hey, I found this thing. And then they go get a banana.
Yeah.
And then the researchers plant flags and get landmine detecting equipment to confirm the mine, and can then get a bomb removal team to come and disarm and remove the mine.
Yes. Even though they still do use the excavation teams and the mine detection equipment, it's way more efficient for them to have a targeted place to search than to try and sweep an entire field. The minesweeping game is much easier to do than minesweeping a minefield.
Yeah.
For real.
Yeah.
And so it's expensive, it's time consuming, and this way they can have really targeted, like, these are the places we need to really look and be reasonably sure that they're not going to encounter any mines that were missed by the rats along the way because the rats are so good at this activity.
Really, the truth is, too, like when you start thinking about this, these creatures are so smart, and the training itself is essentially the same thing as the TB spit samples. What they do is they teach the rats to perform an action to earn food, then teach them to perform those actions in the response to a specific smell, which is going to be the explosive or some kind of active ingredient in the landmine.
Yep. So very cool stuff. These heroic rats are helping to identify disease in people that otherwise might not be detected way more efficiently and way cheaper than doing the other testing way, and then help save some people's lives because they can get them on a course of treatment that before it gets too bad. And they can go out into these fields, detect landmines all day, and prevent people from being needlessly exploded by these recklessly left mines. So pretty happy with these rats so far.
I feel like I already love rats, but I guess there's a question, like, is there anything else that they do that couldn't endear them more to us?
In fact, there is.
Of course there is.
Yes, because of course there is. So this is another amazing thing. They also train rats to detect humans who have been trapped under rubble from a collapsed structure, such as from like an earthquake or something.
Yeah, earthquakes, terrorist attacks, general wear and tear of buildings, many other phenomenon that cause large buildings, bridges, or other human-made structures to collapse before people have had a chance to escape. These are examples of like disasters that happen where they can bring rats in and be helpful for search and rescue teams.
And now this is really important because finding survivors in a building that has collapsed is extremely time sensitive. You don't have time to like wander around looking and see. Maybe you'll run into someone if you're lucky. The tragedy of these collapses is how often victims are feet or even inches sometimes from rescue, but could not be found in time to save them because they're obscured by all the stuff that's hiding them there. There's a lot going on. There's often smoke and debris, and you just like they're right there. And even if not, they might be way back under the rubble. But like all the more reason to like try and as efficiently as possible pinpoint where they are so that rescue efforts can be devoted to finding them and extracting them from that dangerous situation.
Absolutely. So rats, again, with their incredible sense of smell, their ability to squeeze into small spaces, and their trainability, can learn to find people trapped in rubble for handlers to then direct extraction teams. So again, it's not necessarily that the rats are dragging people out of the rubble. That's not what they're doing. But they're going, hey, over here. Like, hey, over here. And that's kind of what they're doing. And that in itself is enough to save lives.
Yeah, and of course they would use dogs for something like this, but rats have some really key advantages in this particular case, even beyond the smell. One is that they're very small, so they can get through small spaces. They're agile, they're fast, they're light, and they're likely to be able to get through all those little nooks and crannies, and they're too light to risk causing further collapse. You can imagine if you're trying to dig through it, you might accidentally push something out of the way that was holding up a structure that then collapses further. The rats aren't going to do that. They're just going to squeeze through, barely making, it's almost as if they're not there. They're like little furry ghosts that can pass through everything very easily. It's kind of what they do.
Right. So unlike finding landmines, though, or smelling spit samples, the rat isn't easily observed when it enters the rubble. And when it comes out, you can't easily know if it's found anything. So these rats are equipped with adorable little vests with 3D printed housing encasing a video camera so that the handler can watch a live feed of the rat working through the rubble. And thus, the handler identifies when there is a person trapped. So the rat can just go look and search for the smell and then have somebody kind of being a second set of eyes for them. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and they're not scanning around. They're like legitimately, they hone in on the smell of a person, and then they go to them. Now, this, as far as I could tell, this is fairly recent. Like, this is the kind of research that's only been like the landmine stuff's been happening for some time. Tuberculosis stuff is a little bit more recent. This, I think, is the most recent that way that they've decided to train rats to help people. And so, as far as I can tell, this has only actually been implemented in mock sort of lab settings with simulated disasters staged, so it like they put out the rubble and they like hide stuff in it. And so that's that kind of where they're at with the training right now. Now they've been working on increasing the complexity of the training because they need it to, you got to imagine the rats going out there, they're not going into the sterile, clean, well-organized rubble. It's going to be chaos. And not only is there going to be chaos, but there's going to be a ton of distraction. There's going to be people yelling.
Right.
There's probably going to be sirens, drilling, there might be water or smoke. There's going to be all kinds of external stimuli that's going to make it way more difficult and terrifying for this poor little rat that they're going to encounter if they were actually traversing the dynamic situation, such as a collapsed building from an earthquake. So they're working on that level of training still. It's just, it takes a bit more time because there's so many things the rat has to be prepared to encounter. They can't just put it in a little cage and have it like go find someone. It's got to be in a situation that's very intense.
Right. So in the training scenarios, they tested rats finding a few things. They found people, clothes, plastic bags with clothes, and the rat successfully found people 83% of the time. So again, super effective in what they're doing.
And much better at like other things that might just be like sift through rubble and find person. Try and listen for someone calling out. And the other thing that they did in these experiments that was cool is they got them to detect the difference between people who were alive and people who were deceased. They were able to hone in really only primarily on the people who were alive, and they were pretty good about doing that. And that allows them, again, it's like, it's not that we don't want to extract the bodies of the people who were deceased, but like the critical thing is the people who are still alive who need help now, and they might be unconscious, or they might be in a position where for whatever reason, they can't cry out. And so it's imperative that the rat is able to sort of get in there, they focus in on their pinpoint, they sort of make a beeline to person buried under rubble, and then the person who's watching the camera can see, there's where we need to go, head there right now. And they can sort of work on their extraction in a pinpointed way that's way more efficient, way more effective, way more likely to save people's lives.
I mean, again, another reason why you should love rats.
Yes. And I can't stress enough, it's so adorable. It's like, look at these videos of these rats. They're like, they're all dressed up in their like military disaster gear and their little vests and all that. And it's just, and you look at them and you're like, I want one of those. So I think maybe you have the temptation to get one of those rats, but I think if you're going to spend the money on it, donate it to the organizations that are doing this amazing, amazing work so that they can keep doing what they're doing. They can feed the rats, they can give them swanky iPads and all that sort of thing, and keep the system working so that lives can be saved.
I really like the idea that there's like a manufacturing plant somewhere that got like an order for tiny vests, and they were like, what the hell is this? Like, because they probably couldn't disclose what the research was, and they were like, we got to train rats to wear vests, but we need somebody to like manufacture these.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that so much.
Yeah, it's pretty great. All right, so yeah, as we said, this is kind of a shorter one. That's what we have to say. I think for me, the main take home here is just that, first of all, it's amazing that we can do this work. It's amazing that humans figured out a way to leverage other animals, and the way they do it is this sort of cooperative relationship. The rats do get something out of this. It has to be voluntary engagement, and so they do it because they get to earn a food reward. And the people really celebrate these rats. They love the fact that these rats are so helpful and so good. And so there are a lot of experiments around the world that use animals in this way, and they have to euthanize them afterward. And I didn't think to check on that in researching this topic. I really hope they're not euthanizing these rats when they're done saving a bunch of people's lives.
Right.
Hopefully they get to live out their lives in like a cushy little cage where they, or a large arena where they can sort of run around and get all the food that they want and be fat and happy. I'm not sure. I mean, the rules and regulations are probably different in Tanzania and other countries, but I hope that they treat them humanely when they sort of at the end of their service that they didn't really sign up for, but they do get treated well while they're there.
100%. If a rat retires from bomb sniffing or tuberculosis smelling or rubble exploring, I will adopt it.
Indeed. Yeah. Reach out to us for the ex-military bomb sniffing rats for the Popo group.
Yeah, send them to the vegans.
Yeah, exactly. We'll hang out with them. That'd be cool.
Yeah, it'd be great. I think my big takeaway is just like, this is another example of how behavior science is super powerful and how it can be helpful and how it can be simple. Like, it doesn't need to be some like really like state-of-the-art technology. Maybe that will be helpful later and continue to do that, but like the behavior science exists now and it's powerful and it's far more effective than some of the things that are being done already. So there's no reason why we shouldn't consider this as a possible option, if not an effective option, for life-saving assessments or life-saving things. I mean, I think it's just pretty incredible from that regard.
That's actually a really good point. And so I'm going to piggyback on that just a little bit, because just as you said, one of the reasons this is so important is because a lot of these countries, they can't afford some of the high-tech stuff. And like maybe high-tech stuff will come down the road. Maybe some super philanthropist will donate a lot of that to these people. But in the meantime, they have a tool at their disposal that is the most accurate, cheapest thing that they can have. And it's easy to use and it's efficient. It's mad efficient.
Yeah.
Like they're so good at what they do so quickly. And like they work for actual peanuts. I mean, banana mash, but you know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's just the coolest thing. Like it's just so love to celebrate the fact that this is even a thing that exists. And that it I think is one of those solutions that actually is very meaningful for people who don't have the sort of financial income or the resources to do it any other way. And honestly, like they kind of don't need to right now.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Well, we should definitely give some recommendations, but I would like to say that this episode is brought to you by the sweat, tears, and hard work done by the Why We Do What We Do crew, but sure, let's give credit to the advertisers. All right, we've been talking about rats, we've been talking about tuberculosis and landmines and collapsed buildings. Let's talk about recommendations.
Yes, let's do it.
Recommendations.
I am recommending an album. It's kind of old now. It's, coming up on 20 years old.
Oh my God.
I know. This is a band called Seyasin. I think it was their second album, maybe their first full length. It was self-titled, so just called Seyasin. And man, I've been listening to this album a lot lately. It came out in 2006, but it is just gold. The whole thing from top to bottom is fantastic. Really enjoy it. So you can probably find it out there on all streaming services. Go look out for Seyasin, Saosin, if you're interested in it. I just really love this album. Good rock album. just awesome melodies, awesome harmonies, all kinds of good stuff.
Yeah, super interesting. Is this the one after Anthony Green left, or is this the one with Anthony Green?
It's after he left and before he came back.
Right. I forgot there was like a brief period where he was back too. Yep. Great band. Super interesting musicality and stuff. I love it.
Yeah, they're weird, but they're great. They're good drummer, really good, fun to watch.
Yeah. So mine is the 5th book in a series of books that is just a wild time, and the book is Heretics of Dune, which is the 5th book out of the original Dune series, which is made of 6 books from Frank Herbert and then 2 from his son that were supposed to be like the end sequel. But
okay,
what I would say, like, start with Dune, obviously, because by the time you get to this one, you are nearly 5,000 years in the future. A worm god has died, and now there are sex witches that are trying to take over the universe with their vaginas. It's a wild time. There's clones, it's a whole thing. Excellent. Wild time.
Okay.
Wonderful story. Super interesting philosophy. I was
like, you are recommending this, right?
I am. Yeah. I'm 100% recommending this. I would say though, you have to be ready to dive into a world that is just, you have to accept it, is what I'm saying.
Do you need to read the first 4 books before you get to this one?
Yeah. You need to read the first 4 books because it's just, none of it will make sense. It will arguably not make sense when you get into the 5th book, when you get there. But it is a great and interesting and very unique universe for sci-fi. Like, there's nothing like it.
Fun.
And it's super cool. It makes me want to, like, eat the spice melange because it all apparently smells like cinnamon.
Okay. Deal.
Yeah. It's great.
That's awesome. Love that. All right, good. Yeah, we finished this kind of efficiently. Hope you enjoyed our path down Hero Rats alley. I don't know what to call that, but it's been fun, at least for me.
Yeah, it's great.
If you liked this episode and you would like to support us, as I said, you can join us on Patreon. If you do, you get all kinds of bonus stuff. And actually, we're running a campaign. If we get extra people, or if we get up to 15 people, then we'll do a virtual hangout with y'all. You can ask us questions. We'll just sort of chat and have fun, and it'll be light and casual and all that sort of thing. Trying to get that by June or sometime in June. So hurry on over and sign up at whatever level makes sense for you, and we'll be thrilled about that outcome. And in addition to that, if you have other ideas you'd like to see available as a perk for joining Patreon, let us know. Like, we're open to suggestions on that. Patreon supporters, we'll talk about you in a second.
Yeah.
You certainly can do that thing too, and I'll post that there. There's all kinds of fun stuff over there. We also have some merch for sale. I don't know, people who like to buy podcast merch. I have bought podcast merch, so maybe you're one of those people. And if you are into that sort of thing, we've got some good stuff over on our website. It doesn't just have our name on all of it either. Some of it does, but use other things that it says. We got shirts and hoodies and beanies and coffee mugs and water bottles and all kinds of good stuff over there. So you can head over to our website. You can also find more about our episodes by going there. Although I'm a little behind on posting all of the episodes, but you can find a bunch of information.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah. In addition, you can also just leaving a rating and review, subscribe, tell a friend, all that good stuff. And for all the people who have already supported us on Patreon, we thank you so much. I'd like to say thank you to Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, The Daily BA, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, and Brian. Thank you guys so much. You are the best, and we really appreciate you.
Yes, you rule. You're the best ever.
Of course, thank you for listening, everyone who's out there. We probably would speak to an open, empty arena of nobodies, but still, we're more happy that you are there with us on this journey. If you would like to tell us anything about Hero Rats, or about the Dune series, or rock bands from the early aughts that you're interested in, or landmines, or tuberculosis, or collapsed buildings, you should definitely email us. You can reach us at info@wwd.podcast.com. Audio production, mixing, and all of the good audio stuff that you hear is courtesy of Justin. Our writers and fact checkers are Jess, Shane, and myself. And thank you so much for recording with me today, Shane.
Yeah, always.
As a rare evening recording for us.
Yeah, no, it's fun.
Is there anything that I missed or anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, just thank you all for being here, and we look forward to the next 1,000 episodes that we're going to keep doing.
Indeed. All right, perfect. Then this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.